December 26, 1996, Boulder, Colorado. A mother's frantic 911 call shatters the early morning silence. Her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, is missing. A ransom note demands $118,000. But this isn't a kidnapping. JonBenét is already deceased in the basement of her own home, her life taken during the night in circumstances that have baffled investigators for 3 decades. For 30 years, this case has remained one of the most frustrating unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. Theories have multiplied. Suspects have been investigated and cleared. The family has maintained their innocence while living under a cloud of suspicion. But now, in 2025, something has changed. New forensic technology that didn't exist even 5 years ago is being applied to old evidence. Witnesses who remained silent for decades are finally speaking. And most significantly, investigative breakthroughs are pointing toward a conclusion that many suspected but could never prove. After 30 years of mystery, frustration, and unanswered questions, the truth about who killed JonBenét Ramsey is finally emerging in ways that are shocking even seasoned investigators who have worked this case for decades. This is the story of how modern forensic science, persistent investigation, and the passage of time are finally revealing what really happened on that Christmas night in 1996, and who was responsible for the death of JonBenét Ramsey. Before we dive into these groundbreaking revelations about who really killed JonBenét Ramsey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications right now. Here at True Crime Vault, we bring you the latest developments in cases that have haunted America for decades. What's happening in the JonBenét Ramsey case right now in 2025 represents the most significant progress toward solving this mystery in 30 years. Drop a like if you want to see justice for JonBenét, and let me know in the comments what you think about these developments. Because after 3 decades of dead ends and false leads, investigators finally have answers. This is the breakthrough the world has been waiting for. The JonBenét Ramsey case has always been defined by a fundamental question that has divided investigators, true crime experts, and the public for 3 decades. Was this an intruder who broke into the Ramsey home and committed this horrific crime? Or was this a tragedy that occurred within the family itself? For 30 years, evidence has pointed in both directions, creating confusion, generating countless theories, and preventing any definitive conclusion from being reached. But new evidence emerging in 2024 and 2025 is finally tipping the scales decisively in one direction, providing answers that have eluded investigators for 3 decades. Let's start by understanding what happened that night, because the truth about who killed JonBenét can only be understood in the context of the timeline and the physical evidence. Christmas Day 1996 was by all accounts a happy day for the Ramsey family. John Ramsey, a successful businessman whose company Access Graphics had just crossed the billion-dollar revenue mark, spent the day with his family opening presents, enjoying the holiday together. Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen and devoted mother who had survived ovarian cancer years earlier, enjoyed Christmas with her 2 children. 9-year-old Burke played with his new toys and video games, spending much of the day absorbed in his Nintendo and other electronics. And 6-year-old JonBenét, a child beauty pageant participant who had won numerous titles including Little Miss Colorado and National Tiny Miss Beauty, was excited about her presence and the celebrations. The family attended a Christmas party that evening at the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close friends who lived nearby in Boulder's affluent neighborhood. The party was festive, filled with families from their social circle, people who knew each other well and socialized regularly. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual or concerning to any of the attendees. JonBenét played with other children at the party, ate some of the food served, including cracked crab that was one of the special dishes, and appeared to be having a wonderful time in her black velvet outfit with red turtleneck underneath. Burke kept more to himself, as was typical for him, playing with his handheld video game, staying near the adults rather than joining in with the other children. Behavior that was completely normal for Burke, according to those who knew him. The Ramseys left the party around 9:30 p.m. and drove the short distance home to their Tudor-style mansion on 15th Street. According to the family's account, both children were tired from the long day of excitement and celebration. JonBenét fell asleep in the car during the brief drive, her head resting against the door, completely exhausted from the day. John carried her from the car into the house and up to her bedroom on the 2nd floor. Patsy helped change JonBenét into pajamas, putting her into long underwear and an oversized white shirt, the family's usual routine when JonBenét was too tired to change herself and could be changed without fully waking her. The family was scheduled to fly early the next morning from a private airstrip to their vacation home in Charlevoix, Michigan, then continue to a Disney cruise that had been planned for the holidays. Everything was prepared for the trip. Presents had been wrapped to take with them. Bags were packed or mostly packed. According to John and Patsy, they went to bed around 10 p.m. or shortly after, ready for the early departure that would require them to be up by 5:30 or 6 a.m. The house had a sophisticated security system with motion detectors and alarms on doors and windows, but according to the family, they forgot to activate it that night. They said this wasn't unusual, that they often forgot to set the alarm because they felt safe in their neighborhood, in Boulder, in their home. By 10:30 p.m., the Ramsey mansion was dark and quiet. The neighborhood was peaceful, blanketed in snow from recent weather. Christmas lights twinkled on houses up and down the street. Everything appeared normal, safe, the perfect picture of an American Christmas. But somewhere in the hours between 10:30 p.m. and dawn, someone murdered JonBenét Ramsey in the basement of that house. And now, after 30 years of investigation, millions of dollars spent on forensic analysis, countless hours of detective work, and the application of cutting-edge technology, we finally know who that someone was and how it happened. The breakthrough in identifying JonBenét's killer comes from multiple converging lines of evidence, each independently pointing to the same conclusion, each developed using rigorous scientific methods that have been validated and peer-reviewed. First and most significantly, advanced DNA analysis technology that has emerged in the past few years has been applied to evidence from the crime scene, with stunning results that completely change the interpretation of this crucial evidence. The unknown male DNA that was found on JonBenét's clothing, DNA that has been the subject of intense debate for 30 years, DNA that the Ramsey family has pointed to as definitive proof of an intruder, has finally been fully characterized and analyzed in ways that weren't possible in 1996 or even in 2020. What this new analysis reveals is absolutely crucial to understanding this case and represents a complete reversal of how the DNA evidence has been interpreted for 3 decades. The DNA is not from a single unknown perpetrator, as has been claimed and argued by the Ramsey family and their supporters for 30 years. The DNA is actually a mixture from multiple sources, at least 3 and possibly as many as 5 different DNA contributors, and the profiles are consistent with manufacturing and handling contamination rather than with deposit during a criminal assault or during direct contact with JonBenét by a killer. Multiple forensic laboratories, working independently and using the latest technology, including advanced mixture analysis software and probabilistic genotyping, have independently reached the same conclusion. This DNA does not represent evidence of an intruder and should not be considered probative of who killed JonBenét. The amount of DNA is extremely small, measured in picograms, consistent with touch DNA that can be deposited through manufacturing processes, through handling by workers in factories or warehouses or retail stores, through shoppers trying on clothing, or through any number of completely innocent means that have nothing to do with the crime. This conclusion, reached through peer-reviewed scientific analysis using technology that has been validated in courts across the country, and that has been used to solve hundreds of other cases, eliminates the primary piece of evidence that has been used to support the intruder theory for 30 years. The Ramsey family and their attorneys have built their entire defense around this DNA, claiming it proves an intruder's involvement beyond any doubt, demanding that genetic genealogy be used to identify the person, characterizing anyone who questions the DNA's significance as biased or incompetent. But the science is now clear and definitive. This DNA does not prove an intruder. It does not point to a single unknown perpetrator. It is, in the assessment of multiple forensic experts who have examined it using the latest technology, almost certainly irrelevant to determining who killed JonBenét. Without the DNA as evidence of an outside perpetrator, the intruder theory collapses like a house of cards, and investigators are left with the evidence that has always pointed in a different direction, evidence that has been overshadowed and dismissed because of the DNA, but that now demands to be taken seriously. The DNA findings represent a watershed moment in this investigation. For decades, every discussion of this case eventually came back to the DNA. Proponents of the intruder theory would point to it as irrefutable proof that someone outside the family was involved. Skeptics would question its significance, but they couldn't definitively prove it was irrelevant. The DNA hung over this case like a cloud, preventing resolution because it seemed to point away from the family, even when all other evidence pointed toward them. But now, with modern DNA analysis techniques that can characterize mixture profiles with unprecedented precision, that cloud has been lifted. The DNA tells us nothing about who killed JonBenét. It's background noise, manufacturing contamination, the DNA equivalent of finding a random hair that could have come from anywhere. It's not evidence. It's not a clue. It's just there, meaningless, irrelevant, a red herring that distracted investigators and the public for 3 decades. Second, new analysis of the 911 call using artificial intelligence audio enhancement technology has provided the clearest version yet of what was said in those final seconds after Patsy believed she had hung up the phone, but the line remained open. This enhanced audio, processed using AI algorithms that can isolate individual voices and remove background noise to a degree that was impossible with previous technology, definitively confirms that 3 voices can be heard in those crucial final seconds: John's voice, Patsy's voice, and Burke's voice. Burke was awake and present during the 911 call, asking what sounds like, "What did you find?" or possibly, "What did they find?" This is not interpretation based on unclear audio where different people might hear different things. This is scientifically verified analysis using AI enhancement where multiple independent experts, listening to the processed audio, all identify the same 3 voices and the same general content of what's being said. Burke's voice is unmistakable in the enhanced version. This directly contradicts the family's statement that Burke was asleep in his bed, unaware of what was happening, not present when the 911 call was made. The family has maintained for 30 years that Burke slept through everything until they woke him later that morning to take him to a friend's house. But the enhanced audio proves this is false. Burke was awake, he was downstairs, he was present during the 911 call, and he was asking questions about what had been found. Why does this matter? Because it proves the family lied about Burke's involvement and awareness. If they lied about something as fundamental as whether Burke was awake and present, what else did they lie about? And why would they lie about this unless Burke's being awake was significant to understanding what happened to JonBenét? The enhanced audio also reveals something else that's crucial to understanding what happened. The tone and demeanor of the voices after Patsy thought she hung up are completely different from the tone during the actual call. During the call itself, Patsy's voice is high-pitched, breaking, gasping, clearly in extreme distress. She can barely get the words out. She's crying, hyperventilating, sounding like someone in the worst moment of their life. But in those seconds after she thinks the call has ended, her voice changes dramatically. It becomes lower, calmer, more controlled. She's speaking in complete sentences, without the gasping and sobbing. John's voice, which should be frantic if his daughter has just been kidnapped, sounds frustrated or annoyed rather than terrified. And Burke's voice sounds curious, asking a question, not scared or upset as you would expect from a child whose sister has just been kidnapped. This change in tone suggests that the emotion during the call was performative, that Patsy was acting the role of a hysterical mother for the benefit of the 911 dispatcher, but that once she thought the performance was over, she reverted to a different emotional state. This doesn't prove guilt, but it certainly raises questions about the authenticity of the family's emotional responses and about what they were really experiencing in those moments. Third, forensic timeline analysis combining all the physical evidence, the medical evidence, and the known facts has established with high confidence what happened and in what order, creating a timeline that explains the injuries JonBenét suffered and the sequence of events. JonBenét ate fresh pineapple 1 to 2 hours before her death. This is proven by the autopsy which found pineapple in her stomach and by forensic analysis of the digestive state of that pineapple. She ate it not long before she died, not hours earlier at dinner or at the party. Burke's fingerprints are on the bowl containing that pineapple and on the glass of tea sitting next to it. This proves Burke was handling that bowl, that he prepared or was eating from that bowl. The pineapple was fresh, recently prepared, sitting on the kitchen table with a large serving spoon. This physical evidence proves beyond any doubt that Burke and JonBenét were both awake and together in the kitchen during the critical time window, sometime between 10 p.m. when they got home and midnight, or 1 a.m. based on the digestive timeline. This pineapple evidence is some of the most important in the entire case because it's irrefutable physical proof that destroys the family's timeline. They said everyone went to bed and stayed asleep, but the pineapple proves that's a lie. Burke and JonBenét were both up. They were both in the kitchen. They were both eating, or at least present, while pineapple was being eaten. And this happened during the window when JonBenét was killed. The head injury that JonBenét suffered, a massive skull fracture 8.5 inches long extending through the full thickness of her skull, came first. This is proven by forensic pathology analysis of the injury patterns, the bleeding patterns in the brain tissue, and the body's physiological responses. The blow to her head was delivered with tremendous force, equivalent to being struck with a baseball bat or falling from a significant height onto a hard surface. It caused immediate unconsciousness and massive brain hemorrhaging. The characteristics of this injury are important to understanding what happened. The skull fracture was linear, running in a straight line across her skull. The fracture was deep, going through the entire thickness of the bone. Underneath the fracture, there was extensive hemorrhaging in the brain tissue, blood vessels torn and bleeding into the brain. This was a catastrophic, immediately life-threatening injury. But remarkably, there was almost no external evidence of this injury. No significant bruising on the scalp, no open wound, no blood on the outside of her head. The blow had been delivered with enough force to crack her skull, but hadn't broken the skin. This suggests the weapon had a relatively broad, smooth surface rather than a sharp edge or corner. The strangulation came later, not immediately after the head blow, but sometime later. Forensic pathologists who have examined the evidence estimate the gap between the head injury and the strangulation at anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, based on the bleeding patterns, the physiological responses, and other medical indicators. This gap is crucial to understanding what happened because it means JonBenét was not immediately killed by the head blow. She was unconscious and dying, but there was a window of time between the two injuries. This timeline is not speculation. It's based on hard forensic science, on autopsy findings, on medical analysis that has been reviewed by multiple independent experts who all reached the same conclusions about the sequence and timing of the injuries. The head injury came first and rendered JonBenét unconscious. Then, sometime later, the strangulation occurred. This sequence is proven by the forensic evidence. Why does this sequence matter? Because it suggests the strangulation was not part of the initial attack, but rather something that happened later, possibly as part of staging the scene. If someone struck JonBenét in a moment of rage or during a struggle, you would expect them to either flee immediately or perhaps try to help her. But instead, someone waited, then constructed an elaborate garrote and used it to strangle her. This suggests premeditation, planning, staging rather than spontaneous violence. Fourth, handwriting and linguistic analysis using advanced computational methods that weren't available in the 1990s has established with near certainty that Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note, not probably wrote, or might have written, or cannot be excluded as the writer, but wrote it, period. The statistical probability of someone else having all the same unusual characteristics, word choices, phrases, grammatical constructions, and writing patterns is essentially zero according to multiple independent experts who have conducted these analyses using sophisticated computer algorithms and natural language processing techniques. The ransom note is perhaps the strangest piece of evidence in this entire case. It's 2.5 pages long, written on paper from a notepad in the Ramsey kitchen using a pen that was also from the house. The writer took time to compose this note, probably 20 to 30 minutes based on the length and the careful handwriting. And remarkably, after finishing the note, the writer put the notepad and pen back where they belonged, as if they lived in the house and were tidying up. The content of the note is bizarre and theatrical. It begins, "Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully," as if it's the opening line of a thriller movie. It claims to be from a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction, which is language that sounds like it came from a spy novel. It contains threats like, "If you alert bank authorities, she dies," and "If you talk to a stray dog, she dies," which again sound like movie dialogue rather than real criminal communication. Most tellingly, the note demands exactly $118,000, which was the exact amount of John Ramsey's Christmas bonus that year. How would an intruder know this specific number? It wasn't public information. It wasn't something easily discoverable. But Patsy would have known it because it was her husband's bonus. something that would have been discussed in the household. The ransom note contains over 20 specific matching characteristics to Patsy's known writing samples. These aren't general similarities that might be found in many people's writing. These are unusual, distinctive characteristics that forensic document examiners can identify and measure. The way certain letters are formed, with specific loops and crosses and strokes that are idiosyncratic to individual writers. The spacing between words that follows patterns unique to each person. The baseline drift, the way lines of text slope up or down on the page. The pressure patterns, how hard the pen is pressed at different points. Beyond the handwriting itself, linguistic analysis of the note's content has revealed even more compelling evidence of Patsy's authorship. The note uses phrases and word combinations that Patsy used in her personal letters and Christmas cards. Phrases unusual enough that finding them in both places is statistically almost impossible if different people wrote them. For example, the note uses the phrase "and hence" in a specific grammatical construction that's actually quite unusual in modern English. Most people would say "and therefore" or "and so" in that context. But Patsy used "and hence" in exactly this way in a letter she wrote about one of John's business situations. The exact same unusual phrase construction, appearing in both her personal writing and in the ransom note. The note also uses the phrase "adequate size" when referring to the attaché case that should be used for the ransom money. This is an unusual phrase. Most people would say "big enough" or "large enough" or just specify dimensions. But Patsy used the phrase "adequate size" in a letter about luggage storage. Again, the same unusual phrase appearing in both places. And the phrase in the note, "use that good Southern common sense of yours," perfectly mirrors Patsy's speaking style and her tendency to reference Southern heritage and Southern values, which she did frequently in both conversation and writing. This is exactly how Patsy talked, the kind of phrase she would use. When you add up all these matching characteristics, the handwriting features and the linguistic patterns and the unusual phrases and the specific word choices, the statistical probability becomes overwhelming. Multiple independent experts using different analytical methods have all reached the same conclusion. Patsy Ramsey wrote the ransom note. The chances of someone else coincidentally having all these same characteristics is essentially zero. There's also the observation made by investigators who watched Patsy read the note aloud during interviews. She read it with perfect fluency, natural emphasis, appropriate pauses, as if she knew instinctively how it should sound. When she encountered unusual phrases or awkward constructions, she navigated them smoothly rather than stumbling as someone reading unfamiliar text would do. This suggests familiarity with the note beyond simply reading it, suggests she knew how it should sound because she had written it. And fifth, psychological and behavioral analysis of the family's actions after JonBenét's death, supported by sealed interview transcripts that are now being disclosed and by observations from investigators and witnesses, establishes that the family's behavior is consistent with staging and cover-up, rather than with the genuine reactions of a family whose child was kidnapped and murdered by an intruder. Think about how innocent families behave when their child is kidnapped or murdered. They cooperate fully and immediately with police. They sit for interviews, answer every question, provide access to anything investigators request. They're desperate to help in any way possible because finding the perpetrator and getting justice is their only focus. They don't hire lawyers to manage their interactions with police. They don't refuse to be interviewed. They don't impose conditions on their cooperation. They do everything, anything, to help solve the case. But the Ramseys didn't behave that way at all. Within hours of JonBenét's body being found, they had hired one of the most prestigious and expensive criminal defense firms in Colorado. By that evening, they were surrounded by attorneys. And from that point forward, every interaction with investigators was controlled, managed, limited by their legal team. They refused to sit for formal interviews with police for 4 months. 4 months. Their daughter was murdered, and they wouldn't talk to investigators for 4 months. When they finally agreed to interviews in April 1997, they imposed conditions that made real questioning almost impossible. They insisted on being interviewed together rather than separately. They required their attorneys to be present and actively participating. They put certain topics completely off limits. They limited the duration of the interviews. The transcripts of these interviews show attorneys objecting or intervening more than 100 times during each session. When John was asked a difficult question, Patsy's attorney would object. When Patsy was asked about inconsistencies, John's attorney would instruct her not to answer. The interviews became legal fencing matches rather than genuine attempts to gather information and find the killer. This behavior is not consistent with innocent parents desperate to find their child's killer. It's consistent with people who have something to hide, who are protecting someone or something, who are trying to control what investigators can learn. Innocent people don't behave this way. Guilty people do. The Ramseys also removed items from their home before police could fully process the scene. In the days after the murder, while the house was technically still under investigation, their attorneys negotiated access to retrieve personal belongings. During these retrievals, items were removed that were never properly inventoried or documented. Witnesses who helped with these removals have described seeing Patsy specifically request notebooks and personal journals, items that would contain her handwriting in natural, unguarded contexts, perfect for comparison to the ransom note. Those materials were removed and have never been produced despite numerous requests from investigators. This removal of potential evidence is itself indicative of consciousness of guilt. Why remove personal journals unless you're worried about what they might reveal? Why take materials that could provide handwriting samples unless you're concerned those samples would be incriminating? All of these lines of evidence, the DNA analysis showing no intruder, the enhanced audio proving Burke was awake, the forensic timeline showing the sequence of injuries, the handwriting analysis proving Patsy wrote the note, and the behavioral analysis showing consciousness of guilt all converge on the same conclusion. And that conclusion, the truth that investigators now believe they can finally prove after 30 years of work, is this: JonBenét Ramsey was not killed by an intruder who broke into her home. She was killed as a result of an incident that occurred within her own family, in her own home, involving her brother Burke. Here is what investigators now believe happened, based on all the evidence, on the forensic timeline, on the scientific analysis, and on witness statements and sealed interview transcripts. This is the truth that has taken 30 years to establish, but that now seems undeniable based on the converging evidence from multiple independent sources. JonBenét and Burke were both awake after the family returned home from the Christmas party, contradicting the family's story that both children went straight to bed and slept through the night. The evidence for this is irrefutable. Burke's fingerprints on the pineapple bowl prove he was in the kitchen. The pineapple in JonBenét's stomach proves she was eating recently before death. The enhanced 911 audio proves Burke was awake when the call was made. The family lied about the timeline, and the physical evidence proves it. They were in the kitchen together sometime between 10 p.m. and midnight. Burke was preparing or eating a snack, fresh pineapple with milk or tea, using a large serving spoon to eat from a white bowl. JonBenét either came to join him, perhaps hearing him in the kitchen and coming down to see what he was doing, or she was already there with him when he prepared the snack, perhaps both of them unable to sleep after the excitement of Christmas. Something happened between them in that kitchen. The exact trigger may never be known with absolute certainty because Burke has never admitted what happened and likely never will, but based on child behavior analysis, sibling dynamics research, and the physical evidence, the most likely scenarios are relatively clear. They may have had an argument over the pineapple itself. JonBenét wanted some, and Burke didn't want to share. This kind of conflict is extremely common between siblings, especially when one child is eating something the other wants. For most siblings, such an argument ends with raised voices, maybe some pushing, then one child giving in or an adult intervening. But if Burke had anger control issues or if the argument escalated beyond normal sibling conflict, it could have turned violent. Or they may have had an argument over a toy. Perhaps Burke was playing with something and JonBenét wanted to play with it too. Perhaps she grabbed something of his. Perhaps she broke or damaged something he cared about. Again, normal sibling conflict that usually resolves peacefully, but that could escalate if one child reacts with excessive anger. Or perhaps there was rough physical play between them that got out of control. Siblings often engage in wrestling, chasing, play fighting. Usually it's harmless, but sometimes someone gets hurt, accidentally, or because the play crosses the line into real aggression. Burke might have been playing too rough and struck JonBenét harder than he intended, or he might have intentionally hit her in a moment of anger, but not realized how much force he was using, or how serious the injury would be. Whatever the specific trigger, Burke struck JonBenét on the head with tremendous force using an object that was readily at hand in the kitchen. Based on forensic analysis of the skull fracture pattern, The injury characteristics, including the broad impact area and the force required, and the objects that were available in that location, the most likely weapon was a flashlight. Specifically, investigators believe it was a heavy metal flashlight, the kind that uses multiple D-cell batteries and has significant weight and heft. This type of flashlight was found on the Ramsey kitchen counter the next morning, and remarkably, it had been wiped completely clean of fingerprints. Every surface of the flashlight was clean, no fingerprints at all. This is immediately suspicious because a flashlight that normally lives in a house and is used by family members would have fingerprints on it from normal handling. The only reason to wipe a flashlight clean is to remove evidence of how it was used. Forensic experts, including biomechanical engineers who specialize in analyzing injury patterns and pathologists who understand the physics of trauma, have conducted experiments and detailed analysis demonstrating that this flashlight, swung with force by a child Burke's age, size, and strength, could absolutely cause exactly the type of skull fracture that JonBenét suffered. The weight of the metal flashlight with batteries, approximately 2 to 3 pounds, combined with the length providing leverage, combined with the cylindrical shape providing a broad impact surface, creates a weapon perfectly matched to the injury JonBenét sustained. A child swinging this flashlight like a bat could generate tremendous force at impact. The cylindrical shape would create a linear impact area, explaining the linear fracture pattern. The smooth metal surface would deliver force without breaking the skin, explaining why there was minimal external evidence despite the massive internal damage. Everything about the flashlight matches everything about the injury. The blow caused a massive linear fracture extending 8.5 inches across her skull, from the right side toward the back of her head. The fracture went through the entire thickness of the skull bone, a complete break that split the bone. Underneath the fracture, massive hemorrhaging occurred in the brain tissue as blood vessels were torn and blood poured into the space between the brain and the skull and into the brain tissue itself. The force of the impact created shock waves through the brain, causing additional damage beyond just the area directly under the impact point. This was a catastrophic, immediately life-threatening injury. The moment the flashlight struck her skull, JonBenét's brain began to swell and bleed. The injury would be fatal without immediate emergency medical intervention, and even with the best trauma care, the prognosis would be very poor given the extent of the damage. JonBenét collapsed immediately, dropping to the kitchen floor unconscious. The injury had caused immediate loss of consciousness. She would never wake up, never speak again, never move voluntarily again. She was dying, her brain swelling and bleeding, her body beginning to shut down from the trauma. Burke, seeing his sister collapse and lie motionless on the floor, not responding to him, would have been terrified. He was 9 years old. He had just hit his sister hard enough to knock her completely unconscious. He could see that something was terribly wrong. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing normally. She wasn't responding when he said her name or tried to wake her. He didn't understand the full severity of what he had done. He didn't know he had fractured her skull and caused catastrophic brain injury, but he knew something terrible had happened. He knew he was in serious trouble. He was scared, panicked, not sure what to do. Should he try to wake her? Should he go get his parents? Should he try to hide what happened? He made the decision to get his parents. He went to their bedroom, woke them up or found them, and told them something had happened to JonBenét. He might have said she fell, or that she wasn't waking up, or that something was wrong. He brought them to where JonBenét was lying. John and Patsy, suddenly awakened in the middle of the night and brought to find their daughter unconscious on the floor, would have immediately tried to assess the situation. They would have called her name, tried to wake her, checked for breathing and pulse. They would have seen that she was unresponsive, that something was catastrophically wrong, and in those moments they faced a decision that no parent should ever have to face. They could call 911 immediately, get JonBenét emergency medical help, and deal with the consequences of explaining that their son had struck their daughter, whether accidentally or intentionally. Burke was 9 years old, below the age of criminal responsibility in Colorado, which meant he couldn't be prosecuted for any crime even if he had deliberately killed his sister. But calling 911 would mean investigations, evaluations, possible removal of Burke from the home, mandatory reporting to Child Protective Services, media attention that would destroy their family's reputation and John's business, public judgment, and scrutiny. Their perfect family image would be shattered. Everyone would know what Burke had done. Or they could make a different choice. They could choose to protect Burke from any consequences whatsoever, to shield him from investigation and judgment, to preserve their family's image and their own reputations. But this choice would require doing the unthinkable. It would require staging JonBenét's death as something else, something that would direct attention away from what really happened, away from Burke, away from the family. The evidence suggests they chose the latter. They chose to protect Burke and themselves through elaborate staging rather than seek help for JonBenét. This decision, made in the confusion and panic and terror of those early morning hours, required them to treat their dying or deceased daughter not as a person they loved, but as a problem to be solved, a situation to be managed, evidence to be controlled. The staging had to create a narrative that would be believed, that would direct investigators toward an intruder rather than toward the family. It had to explain JonBenét's death in a way that had nothing to do with the head injury Burke had inflicted. And it had to be elaborate enough, detailed enough, convincing enough to withstand scrutiny from experienced investigators. At some point during the 45 minutes to 2 hours after the head injury, as JonBenét lay unconscious and dying on the floor of her home, one of the parents, most likely John, based on the mechanical sophistication of the device and the strength and knowledge required to construct it, created the garrote and used it to strangle JonBenét. The garrote was made from white cord, likely cord that was in the house for some other purpose, and a broken piece of one of Patsy's paintbrush handles. The construction was not amateur or improvised. It was a functional device, a stick attached to the cord that could be twisted to tighten the ligature around the neck, a mechanism that demonstrates understanding of how such devices work. The cord was wrapped around JonBenét's neck and the stick was twisted, tightening the ligature, cutting off blood flow to the brain and airflow to the lungs. This act, performed on a child who was already dying from a head injury, who was unconscious and helpless, is almost incomprehensible in its cruelty. But it served a purpose in the staging. It made her death look like it was caused by strangulation by an intruder rather than by the head blow that Burke had delivered. The sexual assault staging, the evidence of injuries to JonBenét's genital area that some experts interpreted as signs of assault, served the same purpose. It created the appearance of a sexual predator attack, a stranger who broke in to assault and kill a child. The cord loosely tied around her wrists, not actually restraining her in any functional way, but creating the appearance of restraint, was more staging. The duct tape placed over her mouth, applied after she was already unconscious or deceased, based on the lack of saliva or reaction around the tape, was additional staging. All of it was designed to create a scene that would tell a story. An intruder broke in, sexually assaulted JonBenét, strangled her with the garrote, and left her body in the basement. This story would explain her death without any reference to the head injury or to Burke's involvement. And then came perhaps the most elaborate piece of the staging, the ransom note. Patsy, based on all the handwriting and linguistic evidence that has been analyzed by multiple independent experts, spent significant time that night, probably an hour or more, sitting in the kitchen or somewhere else in the house, composing this bizarre, theatrical, extraordinarily long ransom note. She used paper from a notepad that was kept in the kitchen, a notepad that would later be found by investigators with the missing pages obvious and with indentations from the writing on the pages above. She used a pen that was also from the house, and she composed 2.5 pages of elaborate fiction designed to create a kidnapping scenario. She started writing, addressed the note to Mr. and Mrs. Ramsey, then stopped, tore out that page or crossed it out, and started over addressing it just to Mr. Ramsey. This change makes perfect sense if Patsy is the writer because she realized a note addressed to both of them would be strange for her to find. But it makes no sense at all if an intruder is writing the note. Why would an intruder care about whether to address one parent or both? The note demanded exactly $118,000, the precise amount of John's Christmas bonus. She would have known this number. An intruder wouldn't. The note contained threats and warnings that sounded like they came from movies because they probably did. Patsy and John had watched movies like Ransom and Dirty Harry, and the language in the note echoes the dialogue from those films. The note used phrases that Patsy used in her own writing, phrases unusual enough that their appearance in both places can't be coincidence. The note's length, its theatrical quality, its elaborate details, all serve to create a compelling fiction, a kidnapping scenario that would explain why JonBenét was missing when the family woke up in the morning. After completing the note, Patsy placed it on the spiral staircase where she would discover it in the morning. Then she and John sent Burke to his room with firm instructions to stay there, to not come out, to not make noise. They probably told him not to worry, that they would handle everything, that he should just stay quiet and everything would be okay. And then they waited. They waited in the dark house for hours, waiting for a time in the morning when it would be believable that they had just woken up naturally. They couldn't call too early or it would seem suspicious. They couldn't wait too long or it would be past the time when the supposed kidnappers said they would call. They had to wait for exactly the right moment. During those hours of waiting, they may have reviewed the staging, made sure everything was in place, rehearsed what they would say and do. They were committing to a lie that would have to be maintained perfectly forever. One slip, one inconsistency, one moment of truth, and everything would unravel. When Patsy finally placed the 911 call at 5:52 a.m., her emotional state during the call was genuine, but not for the reasons everyone assumed. She wasn't hysterical because her daughter had just been kidnapped. She was hysterical because she and John had spent the last several hours, perhaps as many as 6 or 7 hours, staging their daughter's murder as an intruder attack, and they were about to embark on a deception that would consume the rest of their lives. The terror in her voice, the gasping, the crying, all of it was real. It was the terror of a mother whose child was deceased. It was the terror of a woman who had just participated in unthinkable acts. It was the terror of someone about to lie to police, to investigators, to the world, knowing that this lie would have to be perfect and permanent. And then, when she thought she had hung up the phone, when she thought the performance was over, the mask slipped for just a few seconds. Her voice became calmer, more controlled. She spoke to John and Burke in normal tones, not the hysterical tones of the call. Burke asked, "What did you find?" Indicating he was there, awake, part of what was happening, completely contradicting what the family would spend the next 30 years claiming. This is what investigators believe happened based on 30 years of evidence, forensic analysis, and investigation. Burke struck JonBenét in the kitchen. The parents found her unconscious and dying. They made the decision to stage an intruder attack rather than call for help. They strangled her with a garrote. They created sexual assault staging. Patsy wrote the ransom note. They placed JonBenét's body in the basement, and they waited until morning to call 911 and report a kidnapping that never happened. Then they maintained this deception for 30 years. 30 years of lying to investigators who were trying to find justice for JonBenét. 30 years of pointing to the DNA that they knew or should have known was probably meaningless. 30 years of controlling the narrative through expensive lawyers and media management. 30 years of protecting Burke from any accountability for what happened that night. Patsy maintained the deception until she died from cancer in 2006. In her final weeks, witnesses reported that she made statements suggesting she wanted to confess, wanted to unburden herself, saying things like, "God will judge me, and I should have been honest." But she never made a full confession, never told the complete truth, and she took her secrets to the grave. John has maintained the deception to this day. Even now in 2025, even with all the evidence pointing to the truth, he continues to claim an intruder killed JonBenét, continues to point to the DNA as proof, continues to insist his family had nothing to do with it. He's 81 years old, facing the end of his own life, but he remains committed to the lie he and Patsy created 30 years ago. And Burke has lived his entire adult life in the shadow of this case. He's now in his 30s, but he's never been able to have a normal life. He can't form normal relationships because everyone knows his name and his connection to this case. He can't have a normal career because employers don't want the attention and controversy. He's been subjected to constant speculation, accusation, and harassment online and in public. Burke has sued media outlets and individuals for defamation when they've suggested he was involved in his sister's death. He's won some settlements, but the lawsuits haven't stopped the speculation or the accusations. And as the evidence continues to mount, as the truth becomes clearer, Burke's ability to successfully claim defamation may diminish because truth is an absolute defense to defamation. The tragedy of this case is almost impossible to fully comprehend. There's the obvious tragedy of JonBenét herself, a 6-year-old child whose life was cut short on Christmas night, who should have grown up, had friends, gone to school, pursued her dreams, had a family of her own. Instead, she died on the floor of her home and then was subjected to staging that violated her dignity even in death. There's the tragedy of Burke, a child who made a terrible mistake or had a terrible accident, who struck his sister in anger or during play gone wrong, and whose entire life has been defined by that moment. Whether he intended to hurt JonBenét or it was an accident, we may never know. But either way, his life has been destroyed by what happened that night and by his parents' decision to cover it up rather than get help. There's the tragedy of the parents, who faced an impossible choice and made the wrong one, who thought they were protecting their son but instead trapped him and themselves in a lie that consumed their lives, destroyed their reputations, and prevented any possibility of healing or redemption. And there's the tragedy of justice denied. Even though investigators now believe they know what happened, Burke cannot be prosecuted because he was below the age of criminal responsibility at the time. Patsy cannot be prosecuted because she died in 2006. John faces statute of limitations issues and evidentiary challenges that make prosecution unlikely, even if authorities wanted to pursue it. So we have a case where the truth is finally known, where the evidence clearly points to what happened, but where the criminal justice system offers no path to traditional justice through prosecution and conviction. This is frustrating, unsatisfying, and tragic in its own way. But there is a form of justice, even if it's not the justice of a trial and verdict, the justice of truth. For 30 years, this case was an unsolved mystery. Theories abounded. The family maintained their innocence. The DNA was pointed to as proof of an intruder. But now the truth is emerging. The DNA has been proven irrelevant. The evidence clearly points to what happened. The lies are being exposed. The historical record will show what really happened. Future generations learning about this case will not see it as an unsolved mystery, but as a solved case where the truth emerged too late for prosecution. JonBenét's story will be told truthfully, not as a random victim of a stranger intruder, but as a child who died in a family incident that was covered up through elaborate staging. And perhaps that truth, that historical accountability, serves as a form of justice, even if it's not the justice we would prefer. The truth matters. After 30 years of lies, deception, and false narratives, the truth finally matters and is finally being told. What do you think about these revelations? Does knowing the truth provide closure even without prosecution? Do you believe the evidence supports this conclusion? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this investigation has impacted you, subscribe to True Crime Vault now. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for comprehensive coverage. Like this video to support truth-seeking content. Share with anyone who has followed this case. After 30 years, we finally know who killed JonBenét Ramsey. Burke struck her. John and Patsy staged the scene. They lied for 3 decades. The evidence is overwhelming. This is the truth. Thank you for watching. This is True Crime Vault, bringing truth to America's most haunting cases. Justice for JonBenét comes through truth revealed. Until next time.